Take a deep breath, and let's hear a story about Lory, who traded her corporate empire for a garden and pottery wheel, finding joy in simplicity. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of Lory Kensington's penthouse apartment, casting long shadows across imported marble floors. Despite the warmth of golden rays caressing her skin, a persistent chill had settled in her bones that even the finest cashmere couldn't dispel. From her vantage point 60 floors above the bustling city, people resembled ants scurrying about with seemingly clear purpose, while she stood still, surrounded by everything and feeling nothing. Her assistant's voice echoed through the intercom, reminding her of 3 board meetings, a charity gala, and a dinner with potential investors. Lory sighed, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her untouched breakfast, a carefully arranged assortment of exotic fruits that had lost their appeal long ago. The walls of her meticulously designed home, once a source of pride, now seemed to close in around her, the expensive artwork blurring into meaningless splashes of color that failed to evoke any emotion. The empire she had built from the ground up now employed thousands, her name emblazoned across skyscrapers in 3 continents. Yet at 45, Lory found herself alone, her calendar filled with appointments, but her heart empty of connection. The gentle ticking of her watch, a rare Swiss timepiece worth more than most people's homes, seemed to mock her, counting down moments of a life that, despite its outward success, had grown increasingly hollow. Her housekeeper, Maria, was the only person who seemed real anymore, her weathered hands and genuine smile a stark contrast to the polished facades Lory encountered daily. That morning, as Maria arranged fresh flowers in a crystal vase, she mentioned her sister's small town 3 hours away, how the air smelled of pine and earth, how neighbors knew each other's names, how her sister's modest garden provided vegetables that tasted of sunshine. Something in Maria's description kindled a forgotten spark within Lory. That night, unable to sleep despite her silk sheets and perfect room temperature, Lory found herself scrolling through real estate listings in rural areas. Her finger hesitated over a property that looked nothing like what someone of her stature would consider a modest farmhouse with peeling paint, surrounded by overgrown gardens and a small pond reflecting the vast sky above. Yet something about the wild, unmanicured beauty called to her, whispering promises of a different kind of wealth she had never allowed herself to consider. The memory of her childhood suddenly surfaced of summers spent at her grandmother's small country home before ambition and drive had consumed her. She remembered the cool feeling of mud between her small fingers as she helped plant tomatoes, the satisfaction of watching them grow a little each day. The sensation of creating something with her hands, rather than through mergers and acquisitions, stirred a longing so profound it took her breath away. Morning found her making unprecedented decisions, her assistant's voice tinged with confusion as Lory instructed her to begin the process of stepping back from daily operations. The board members would be appointed increased responsibilities. Her most trusted colleague would become interim CEO, and her various apartments and houses would be placed on the market. For the first time in decades, Lory felt light, as if the accumulated weight of expectations was beginning to lift from her shoulders. The farmhouse purchase was completed with surprising swiftness, the previous owners accepting her offer with the condition that they leave behind their pottery wheel and kill in the converted barn studio. Lory found herself agreeing without negotiation, something unheard of in her business dealings. That night, she slept deeply for the first time in years, her dreams filled with images of growing things and hands shaped by work more meaningful than signing contracts. Two weeks later, her designer luggage looked strangely out of place on the weathered porch of her new home. Leaving her driver with a generous tip and instructions to return to the city, Lory stood alone, listening to the receding sound of tires on gravel, giving way to a chorus of crickets and distant birdsong. The air smelled of grass warmed by sun, of blooming wildflowers, and of possibilities that required no business plan or strategic vision. Inside, the house bore little resemblance to any place she had ever lived. Wooden floors that creaked beneath her steps, windows that stuck slightly when opened, walls that had witnessed generations of simple, ordinary living. Yet rather than disappointment, Lory felt a curious sense of homecoming, as if the house had been waiting for her all along, patient in its imperfection and honest in its welcome. The sunset that evening painted the sky in hues no artist could replicate, the silence broken only by a gentle wind rustling through oak leaves. Lory sat on the porch steps, her expensive watch removed and placed in a drawer, time now measured by the gradual dimming of light and the first appearance of stars overhead. She breathed deeply, feeling something inside her begin to unwind, like a tightly coiled spring finally allowed to find its natural state. Her first night in the farmhouse, Lory slept with windows open, cool air carrying the scent of jasmine and distant rain. Her dreams were vivid and peaceful, of hands deep in soil, of shaping clay into vessels both beautiful and useful, of a life measured not in acquisitions but in moments of quiet connection. She woke to birdsong instead of alarm, the day stretching before her without a single scheduled meeting, a blank canvas awaiting her choice of colors. The neighboring property belonged to an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who arrived that afternoon with a basket of vegetables from their garden and freshly baked bread, still warm from the oven. Their welcome held no recognition of her former status, no awareness of the wealth she had accumulated or the power she had wielded. They saw only a new neighbor, a woman starting fresh, and their genuine kindness brought unexpected tears to Lory's eyes as she invited them in for tea in mismatched cups she found in the kitchen cabinets. The first seeds Lory planted with trembling hands were humble lettuce, radishes, and carrots that Mrs. Henderson assured her were for giving to novice gardeners. Each morning she found herself waking earlier, eager to check on their progress, to feel the cool morning dew on her bare feet as she walked through her gradually transforming garden. The business suits and designer dresses hung untouched in closets, replaced by comfortable jeans and simple cotton shirts that grew pleasantly stained with evidence of her new work. The pottery wheel left behind proved more challenging than she anticipated. Unlike business negotiations where her confidence never wavered, here Lory found herself humbled repeatedly as clay collapsed or wobbled beneath inexperienced hands. Yet the frustration felt different cleansing somehow, her perfectionism gradually giving way to appreciation for the process itself rather than just the outcome. Mud dried beneath her fingernails, impossible to remove completely, a badge of her evolving identity. Mr. Henderson, sensing her determination, introduced her to Eleanor, an accomplished local potter who agreed to provide lessons in exchange for help managing her small pottery shop in town. Lory, once accustomed to commanding boardrooms, now found herself sweeping floors, wrapping customers' purchases in paper, and absorbing Eleanor's patient instructions with the earnestness of a child learning something precious. The hours passed differently, stretching and contracting according to the needs of the clay rather than the demands of shareholders. Spring bloomed into summer, and Lory's garden flourished beyond her expectations. The first time she made a salad entirely from vegetables she had grown herself, tears sprang to her eyes at the intensity of flavors, at the connection she felt to the food nourishing her body. Each morning she would walk barefoot through her garden, whispering gratitude to the plants as she harvested what was ripe, the ritual becoming a form of meditation that centered her for the day ahead. Her hands, once manicured to perfection, now bore calluses and small scars from gardening tools, from the wire used to cut clay, from the honest work of creating rather than simply acquiring. She found herself studying these changes in quiet moments, running her thumb over roughened palms with a sense of accomplishment that eclipsed any she had felt signing multi-million-dollar contracts. These were badges of a different kind of success, one measured in personal growth rather than profit margins. The town gradually accepted her presence, curiosity about the city woman giving way to appreciation for her willingness to learn, to participate, to become part of the community without attempting to change it to suit her former lifestyle. At the farmer's market where she began selling her excess produce, she found connection in the simple exchange of goods grown with care, and conversations about rainfall and pest management, and shared knowledge passed freely without expectation of return. When fall arrived with its cooler temperatures and spectacular colors, Lory harvested the last of her summer crops and prepared the soil for winter rest. Eleanor suggested they collaborate on a series of planters' pottery Lory would create to showcase the herbs she had learned to grow and dry. Working in the studio as rain pattered against the roof, Lory felt a harmony between her two new passions, the rhythm of the wheel synchronizing with her breathing, her thoughts clear and focused on the clay taking shape beneath her increasingly confident hands. The first frost brought a letter from her former assistant, updating her on the company's continued success and inquiring with poorly disguised bewilderment about her new life. Sitting by the wood stove that evening, Lory realized 6 months had passed since she left the city. The letter should have prompted longing, or at least curiosity, about the world she had left behind. Instead, she found herself struggling to connect with the person she had been, the endless meetings, the constant pressure, the wealth that had insulated her from the simple pleasures now structuring her days. Her response, written on handmade paper purchased from a local artisan, detailed the quiet joys of her new existence, the satisfaction of eating food she had grown, the meditative quality of throwing clay, the friendships formed without agenda or advantage. She included a small ceramic dish she had made, glazed in blues, that reminded her of the pond on her property at sunrise. The package sent, she felt no urgency about receiving a reply, her sense of time having shifted to align with seasons rather than quarters, with natural cycles rather than fiscal years. Winter settled over the countryside, transforming her property into a wonderland of crystalline beauty. The garden rested beneath a blanket of snow, the pond froze into a perfect mirror, and Lory found unexpected pleasure in the stillness that encouraged introspection. The holidays approached, and rather than the elaborate parties and obligatory gift exchanges of her former life, she found herself crafting presents with meaning herb bundles tied with twine, preserves from her garden's bounty, ceramic mugs glazed in colors chosen specifically for each recipient. Eleanor's pottery shop hosted a holiday sale, and to Lory's surprise, her pieces imperfect but made with genuine care sold quickly. A young couple purchased a set of her garden planters, the woman running her fingers appreciatively over the glazed surface, while explaining they were starting their first garden in the spring. Lory found herself sharing tips she had learned, the connection forming easily around shared enthusiasm rather than calculated networking. The modest payment for her work brought satisfaction entirely different from the substantial wealth she had accumulated in business. The winter solstice found her walking her property under a canopy of stars, breath visible in the cold air, silence broken only by the occasional call of an owl. Halfway through her walk, she realized she was humming a simple, tuneless expression of contentment that arose without conscious thought. Stopping by the frozen pond, she whispered thanks to whatever instinct or courage had led her to this place, to this life that felt increasingly authentic with each passing day. The contentment settled deep in her bones, replacing the persistent chill that had accompanied her through years of material success. As winter deepened, Lory established new rhythms mornings, spent sketching designs for spring plantings and pottery projects. Afternoons working clay in the heated studio, evenings reading books long relegated to someday lists or learning to knit from Mrs. Henderson during weekly gatherings where neighbors shared skills and stories around her wood stove. The farmhouse, initially so different from her luxury apartments, had transformed into a true home, its creaky floors and sometimes drafty windows, part of its character rather than flaws to be corrected. When the first crocuses pushed through melting snow, Lory celebrated their arrival like old friends returning. The changing season brought renewed energy, her body having synchronized with natural rhythms in ways she never experienced in climate-controlled environments. She prepared garden beds with knowledge accumulated over the previous year, her movements more confident, her understanding of the land beneath her feet more intuitive. Seeds planted with prayer and intention promised abundance she now knew to appreciate. The pottery studio called equally strongly, new ideas for glazes and forms having germinated during winter's contemplative months. Lory's hands moved with increased skill, the relationship between her intentions and the clay's response more harmonious. Eleanor, watching her work, commented with quiet pride on how far she had come, not just in technique, but in the patience and presence she brought to each piece. "The clay knows when you're fully here," Eleanor had said, words that would have seemed nonsensical to Lory in her former life but now resonated with profound truth. Spring brought an unexpected visitor, her former CFO, Richard, who arrived unannounced one afternoon as Lory transplanted seedlings into her garden. His expensive car looked alien on her gravel driveway, his tailored suit as out of place as her designer clothes had once seemed in this setting. Yet she welcomed him without embarrassment, aware of the soil beneath her fingernails and the simplicity of her surroundings. His visit, he explained, was born of curiosity after seeing her letter and the beautiful ceramic dish that now sat on his desk. Over a simple meal of vegetable soup and homemade bread served in bowls she had created, Richard gradually relaxed, his initial discomfort giving way to genuine interest in her transformation. "You seem different," he observed, studying her face across the table. "Younger somehow, despite—" He gestured vaguely at her uncolored hair, now streaked with silver, and tied back with a simple band. Lory smiled, understanding what he couldn't quite articulate, that the constant tension had left her features. That contentment had softened the sharp edges ambition had carved. Before leaving, Richard asked to purchase several pieces of her pottery and requested she consider creating a line for the company's client gifts. The old Lory would have immediately calculated profit margins and growth potential. Instead, she promised only to consider it, knowing she would accept only if the work could remain authentic, created with the same care and presence she now brought to everything. Watching his car disappear down the road, she felt grateful for the bridge between her past and present, yet entirely certain of where she belonged. Summer arrived with abundant growth in garden and studio alike. Lory established a small but steady clientele for her pottery, many pieces incorporating elements from her garden, impressions of leaves pressed into clay, glazes colored with botanical inspiration, forms that echoed the natural world she now moved through with belonging rather than ownership. The income, while modest compared to her former wealth, more than met her simplified needs while providing deep satisfaction that no luxury purchase had ever delivered. The community garden initiative she had hesitantly proposed during a town meeting took root, bringing together residents of all ages to transform an unused lot into productive beauty. Children learned to plant seeds and identify beneficial insects. Elderly residents shared traditional growing methods, and families gathered for harvest celebrations as summer progressed. Lory contributed knowledge gained through her own learning journey, finding unexpected joy in teaching others, in witnessing their connection to the earth deepen as hers had. 2 years to the day after her arrival, Lory sat on her porch steps as evening approached, a mug of mint tea cooling beside her, her gaze traveling over the transformation of her property. The once overgrown garden now flourished with purpose, paths winding between vegetable beds, fruit trees beginning to establish themselves along the southern border, wildflowers attracting bees and butterflies in colorful profusion. The studio, visible beyond the herb garden, stood with doors open to the summer breeze, shelves inside lined with her creations. Mrs. Henderson joined her, arriving with a basket of cherries from her orchard and comfortable familiarity that needed no announcement. They sat in companionable silence as twilight softened the landscape, fireflies beginning their evening dance over the pond. "Did you ever imagine this life?" the older woman asked eventually, her question holding no judgment, only gentle curiosity. Lory shook her head, smiling as she watched a family of ducks make their evening procession across the water. "I spent decades accumulating wealth," Lory replied, her voice soft with the wonder of realization that still occasionally struck her. "But I never understood richness until I felt soil between my fingers, until I watched seeds I'd planted push toward sunlight, until I shaped clay into something useful with these hands." She extended her palms, examining the evidence of work she had once considered beneath her calluses and small scars. She now wore as proudly as she had once worn designer labels and executive titles. The farmhouse kitchen hosted a gathering that weekend, celebration of summer's abundance attended by neighbors who had become friends, by Eleanor and her pottery students, by community garden participants and farmers market vendors. Tables stretched across Lory's lone boar potluck contributions and displayed her latest ceramic pieces. Conversation flowed as easily as the homemade cider, and children played hide and seek among garden rows as twilight descended. Looking around at faces illuminated by lantern light, Lory felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced despite years of exclusive memberships. One evening the following week, sorting through remaining boxes from her move, Lory discovered a forgotten photo album from her corporate days. The images captured her receiving awards, cutting ribbons at new office locations, shaking hands with business leaders and politicians. The woman in those photographs, impeccably dressed, perfectly poised, smile never quite reaching her eyes, seemed like a stranger now, someone she had known briefly rather than been for most of her adult life. She closed the album without regret, returning it to the box without feeling compelled to display it. Instead, she reached for a small ceramic piece on her bedside table, one of her earliest attempts at pottery, misshapen and awkwardly glazed but cherished for what it represented. Running her fingers over its imperfect surface, she thought about value and worth, about the measurements she had once applied to herself and others. Success now meant harmonious relationship with the land that fed her, creativity that served function, and beauty equally. Connections based on genuine sharing rather than strategic advantage. Autumn returned with spectacular color and cooling temperatures, the cycle beginning again with the satisfaction of completion and the promise of renewal. Lory harvested pumpkins and winter squash, collected seeds for next year's planting, prepared garden beds for their seasonal rest. The pottery wheel continued turning, her hands crafting vessels designed to hold winter soups and teas, to bring beauty to tables when outside growth paused. Each piece carried intention and gratitude, qualities customers seemed to sense in her work. Late one afternoon, as golden light slanted across her property, Lory sat beneath an oak tree, sketchbook open on her lap, plans for spring gardens taking shape alongside designs for complementary pottery. A sense of profound peace settled around her, not the temporary absence of stress, but the positive presence of contentment, of knowing she was precisely where she belonged, doing work that aligned with her truest self. The ambitious woman who had once measured life in acquisitions and achievements had transformed as surely as clay in the kiln. The gentle breeze carried the scent of ripening apples and distant wood smoke. Birds called their evening songs, and somewhere in the garden, a late butterfly visited the remaining flowers. Lory closed her eyes, breathing deeply of the air that had healed her, feeling gratitude expand through her entire being. The wealth she now possessed couldn't be calculated in traditional terms: connection to land and seasons, friendships without agenda, work that joined heart and hands, days measured in natural rhythms rather than arbitrary deadlines. By conventional standards, she had stepped away from success. In truth, she had stepped into abundance beyond measure.